In 1995, 12 girls boarded a team bus after winning their regional soccer championship and were never seen again. No crash, no wreckage, no trace. But 30 years later, when a forgotten bus is found buried beneath an abandoned warehouse in Millbrook, so is a survivor, and what she remembers will unravel a truth more terrifying than anyone imagined. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury and make sure no name stays forgotten. The fog had settled thick over Millbrook County like a burial shroud, clinging to the smokestacks of dead factories and muffling the sound of tires on rain-slicked asphalt. You could drive through downtown and not realize half the buildings were empty, their windows dark as closed eyes. That's how things disappeared around here, quietly, without ceremony, and without anyone asking questions. It was just past 6 a.m. when the call came. Detective Sarah Chen had just poured her first coffee when the dispatch crackled through. Possible discovery at the old Steel-Tech demolition site. Construction crew unearthed what appears to be a school bus. Plates match a long-closed case. Sarah stood frozen in the silence of her kitchen, the mug warming her palm. Her other hand reached automatically for the notepad she always kept near the toaster, but she didn't need to write it down. She knew the case by heart. 12 girls, 1 coach, 1 parent volunteer, vanished October 14, 1995. They were the Millbrook High JV soccer team, her friends, her second family. She'd been supposed to be on that bus, serving as team manager, but her grandmother's heart attack that morning had kept her behind. For 30 years, she'd carried that small, strange guilt like a weight in her chest. She left the untouched coffee on the counter, grabbed her keys, and drove toward the industrial district without locking her door. The demolition site was chaos controlled by yellow tape. Workers stood in hushed clusters, their breath visible in the morning chill. The burgundy and gold of the bus was visible in patches beneath decades of mud and rust, half crushed under the concrete remains of the warehouse that had collapsed on top of it. "Mom," the site foreman greeted her, removing his hard hat. "We didn't touch anything once we saw what it was." "You'll want to see this." Sarah nodded, her throat too tight to speak. They had cleared one side of the vehicle enough to access the emergency exit. A sour, earthy smell hung in the air, and inside was dust, mold, and the brittle decay of abandoned time. The seats were still in place, some of the seatbelts were still latched. A water bottle sat in a cup holder, its label faded but readable, property of Millbrook High Athletic Department. A single soccer cleat lay on the floor beneath the third row, still caked with mud from a game played 3 decades ago. But no bodies. The bus was empty. That made it worse somehow, a hollow monument to vanished lives, a question mark buried in industrial waste. Sarah stepped inside, her boots creaking on the warped floor. The air was stale and heavy with secrets. As she reached the front of the bus, she saw it. Taped to the dashboard, barely faded despite the years, was a team roster written in Coach Martinez's careful handwriting. 12 names, all ages 14 to 16. At the bottom, someone had scrawled a message in different handwriting, darker, more desperate, written in what looked like dried blood. "We never made it home. Tell them we fought." Sarah stepped back out of the bus, the October air suddenly colder. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, but it sounded more like a warning than rescue. She turned to the site foreman, her voice flat and professional. "Seal off the area. No one touches anything else until the state team gets here." "Yes, ma'am." She looked back at the bus, framed by twisted metal and 30 years of silence. They were supposed to be celebrating a championship victory. Instead, they never came home. And now, after 3 decades, the bus had returned without them. But someone had been alive long enough to write that message. Someone had been there long enough to leave behind a promise that they had not gone quietly into the dark. The old Millbrook County Records building smelled of mildew and burnt coffee, its fluorescent lights humming like trapped insects. Sarah stood at the counter, her fingers drumming against the scarred wood as the clerk retrieved the case file from deep storage. It had been 2 hours since she left the bus site, but her hands still felt gritty with its dust. "Here we are. the clerk said, sliding the thick folder across the counter with both hands like it might disintegrate if handled roughly. Millbrook High Soccer Team disappearance, October 14th, 1995. Sealed after 7 years. No updates. Sarah nodded and carried the heavy file to a corner desk. She opened it slowly, afraid something might leap out. Inside were team photos, photocopied school records, a list of personal items reportedly left behind in the locker room, and at the very bottom a report stamped in red ink. Missing persons, presumed dead, no evidence of foul play. That stamp had haunted the town for 3 decades. No evidence, no foul play, no girls. But Sarah had always suspected there was more. Everyone had. The bus driver's name was Rick Patterson, a part-time employee with the district transportation department. Recently hired, barely vetted, he had a wife and 2 kids, but had reportedly left town shortly after the disappearance. He was never found either. Then there was the substitute coach. Coach Martinez had been sick with flu that week. In her place was Janet Crowley, a woman nobody remembered hiring. The records listed her address, but it was now an empty lot on the outskirts of town. She'd never been seen again either. Sarah leaned back in her chair, staring at the team photo. She still remembered their names, their positions, their dreams of college scholarships. She traced a finger over one face in particular. Amy Kessler, team captain. Blonde ponytail, fierce green eyes, and a smile that could light up the entire field. Amy had lived 3 blocks from Sarah back then. They'd shared rides to practice every day that season, talking about boys and college applications, and whether they'd still be friends when they were 30. The photo made Sarah's chest ache until a knock snapped her back to the present. Detective Chen, Officer Murphy, stood in the doorway, eyes wide. "You need to see this. They found someone at the hospital. They were at Millbrook General 15 minutes later. A woman had been discovered by early morning joggers collapsed near the old industrial district, about half a mile from the dig site. She was barefoot, dressed in clothes that didn't match any current fashion, dehydrated and barely conscious. But she was alive." The nurse stopped Sarah outside the emergency room. "She's stable," the nurse said quietly. "No ID, mid-40s, but keeps insisting she's 16 years old. We thought it was trauma-induced confusion until she told us her name." The nurse handed Sarah a clipboard. Scrawled across the intake form in shaky handwriting was a name that made Sarah's knees buckle. Amy Kessler. "She says she was on her way home from a soccer game," the nurse added gently, "and that she's been trying to get there ever since." The woman inside the hospital room sat propped against white pillows, her hair long and tangled, her face gaunt but unmistakable. Sarah stopped at the foot of the bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Amy." The woman blinked slowly, her eyes filling with tears. "Sarah, you got old," she whispered, her voice cracked from disuse. Sarah felt her throat close. "You remember me?" Amy nodded weakly. "You were supposed to come with us. Your grandmother got sick." Tears burned behind Sarah's eyes. She walked slowly to the chair beside the bed and sat down, too stunned to form words. "They told me nobody would remember," Amy whispered, staring at her hands. "That nobody would come looking?" "Who told you that?" Sarah asked gently. Amy looked past her toward the window, then back again. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "The Colonel. He said the world had moved on without us, that it was better if we just disappeared." Sarah leaned forward. "Amy, where have you been for 30 years? Amy's eyes went distant, unfocused. "We never made it home from regionals. There was a man waiting at the crossroads. He got on the bus and everything changed. The sun had dipped behind the hospital by the time Sarah returned to the station. Golden light filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across her desk. She didn't sit down. Instead, she stood staring at the whiteboard she had cleared that morning. It now held 12 names in neat columns. Above them in red marker she had written, "Millbrook High Soccer Team, October 14th, 1995. Below that, a new heading, "Amy Kessler, survived, returned." She circled Amy's name, then added, "Found October 15th, 2025 near industrial site. Appears to have aged normally, Believes she's still 16, no memory of events after bus was diverted. Mentions someone called the Colonel. Sarah exhaled slowly. Something didn't add up. If Amy had been alive all this time, where had she been? And what about the others? By 9 p.m. she was back at the hospital. The doctors had run basic tests, no signs of serious injury beyond dehydration and what appeared to be long-term malnutrition. Her fingerprints were being processed, but Sarah didn't need confirmation. It was her, she was certain. Amy had been moved to a private room. When Sarah entered, she found her staring at a paper cup of water like she'd never seen one before. "Hi again?" Sarah said softly. Amy looked up. Her face still held the hollow look of someone who'd been away from the world too long, but her voice was clearer now. "You believe me, don't you?" "I do," Sarah said, taking the chair beside the bed. Amy gave a sad smile. "Most people think I'm crazy." Sarah pulled out a small digital recorder. "Can I ask you about the bus ride?" Amy nodded slowly. I remember the beginning. We were so happy. We'd just beaten Central High 3-1. Coach Martinez was supposed to come with us, but she was sick. There was a substitute, a woman none of us had seen before. What was her name? Amy frowned, concentrating. She said to call her Miss Janet. She seemed nervous, kept checking her watch. Then the driver took a wrong turn. Sarah leaned forward. Wrong turn where? Instead of taking Route 9 home, we went north toward the old mining roads. When some of us started asking questions, the driver pulled over. That's when the man got on. What did he look like? Amy shivered. Tall, maybe 50 years old, military clothes like army surplus. He had this way of talking, real quiet but scary. He said there had been an accident up ahead, that we needed to take a detour. What kind of accident? Amy shook her head. There was no accident. I know that now, but he seemed so official, so in control. Even Miss Janet listened to him. He said we'd be home by midnight, that our parents had been contacted. But you never made it home. Amy's voice dropped to a whisper. We drove for hours. The roads got narrower, more remote. Some of the girls started crying. Then we stopped at this place like a compound. There were buildings, fences, men with guns. Sarah felt ice in her veins. A compound? He called it the sanctuary, said we were special, chosen, that the world outside was dangerous, full of corruption and lies. He said we'd be safe there, protected. Amy clutched the bedsheet. The Colonel, that's what everyone called him. He said our families had been told we died in a bus crash, that memorial services had been held, that there was no point in trying to go back because nobody was waiting for us. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. How long were you there? Amy stared at the ceiling. Time got strange. They took our watches, covered all the windows, said it was always Tuesday, even when it wasn't. They gave us new names, new clothes, new rules. What was your new name? Victory, Amy whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. They said Amy Kessler was dead, that Victory was who I was now. Sarah reached over and squeezed her hand gently. You're Amy Kessler. You always were. Amy looked at her with desperate hope. The other girls, some of them started to believe it after a while, started to forget their real names, their families, but I never did. I kept a list hidden, wrote down everything I could remember about home. Do you know what happened to the others? Amy's face crumpled. Some tried to escape. They were brought back broken. Some got sick and never recovered. And some, she paused, her voice barely audible. Some just gave up. Sarah sat in the hospital parking lot afterward, hands shaking as she tried to process what she'd heard. A military-style compound, kidnapped teenage girls, brainwashing and abuse that had lasted for decades. She pulled out her phone and dialed the FBI field office in Cleveland. This was bigger than a local missing persons case. This was organized crime, maybe domestic terrorism. But as she waited for someone to answer, one question kept haunting her. If Amy had been held captive for 30 years, how had she escaped, and why now? The answer, she suspected, was going to be more terrifying than the question. The FBI arrived at dawn. Special Agent Martinez, no relation to the missing coach, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who listened to Sarah's briefing without interruption. By noon, they had established a command center in the Millbrook police station. "We've been tracking similar cases across 3 states," Agent Martinez explained, spreading files across the conference table. "Military-style compounds, missing persons, survivalist groups. Your colonel might be Marcus Webb, former Army sergeant discharged in 1987 for conduct violations." Sarah studied the photograph. The man staring back at her had cold eyes and a rigid posture that suggested absolute control. "Do you think he's still operating?" Agent Martinez nodded grimly. "We believe so. The question is where and how many people he's holding." They returned to Amy's hospital room that afternoon. She was sitting up, looking stronger but still fragile. When they showed her the photo of Marcus Webb, her face went white. "That's him," she whispered. "That's the colonel." "Amy," Agent Martinez said gently, "we need to know how you escaped. Can you tell us what happened?" Amy looked at Sarah, then back at the agent. "The compound burned down 3 weeks ago. Lightning strike during a storm. Some of the buildings caught fire, and in the chaos, a few of us got out." "Us," Sarah repeated. "How many?" Amy's voice was barely audible. "4 of us made it out of the fire, but we got separated in the woods. I don't know where the others went." Agent Martinez leaned forward. "Can you describe the compound's location?" Amy closed her eyes, concentrating. "Mountains, pine trees everywhere. There was a stream that ran behind the main building, and you could hear trains in the distance. Maybe 20 miles north of here, but the roads were all unmarked." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. The old mining region. Plenty of abandoned land, no neighbors for miles. Amy continued. "The colonel always said if anyone tried to leave, if anyone talked, he'd hunt them down. He said he had people everywhere, watching. That's why I was so scared when you found me." Agent Martinez made notes. How many people were at the compound? Amy's face darkened. It changed over the years. "When we first arrived, there were maybe 30 people, men, women, some families. But as time went on, people disappeared. Some tried to leave and never came back. Others just," she paused, "vanished." "What about the other girls from your team?" Amy's eyes filled with tears. "Not all of them made it through the first year. The younger ones, they couldn't handle it. Jessica got pneumonia and died because the colonel didn't believe in doctors. Megan tried to run away and they brought her back beaten half to death. She never spoke again after that." Sarah had to look away. These were kids she'd known, girls she'd laughed with in the hallways. "The ones who survived learned to follow the rules," Amy continued. "They gave up their old names, their old lives. Some of them even started believing the colonel's stories about the outside world being destroyed, about us being the only ones left." Agent Martinez looked up from her notes. "You mentioned 4 of you escaped. Do you know their names?" Amy nodded slowly. "There was Katie Morrison, our old goalkeeper. She was always the toughest of us. Then Sarah Jensen, the midfielder. And," she hesitated, "there was someone else. But she wasn't from our team." Sarah leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Amy's voice dropped to a whisper. "The colonel collected people over the years, not just us. There were others from different places, different times. This girl, she was maybe 12 when she arrived. Said she'd been taken from a school field trip in 1986. Sarah's blood ran cold. She remembered the news stories from her childhood, a bus full of elementary school children that had vanished without a trace. "Her name was Nora," Amy continued. "Sweet kid, never gave up hope. She was the one who helped us escape when the fire started. She knew all the hidden passages, all the weak spots in the fences." Agent Martinez was writing furiously. "We need to find these other survivors. They're our best chance of locating any remaining compounds." Amy grabbed Sarah's hand. "He's still out there." "The colonel. He wasn't at the compound when it burned. He'd been gone for weeks, recruiting new people. When he comes back and finds us gone, he'll be furious." Sarah squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We'll find him before he finds you." But even as she said it, Sarah wondered if that was true. If Marcus Webb had been operating for 30 years, if he'd successfully hidden dozens of people from the world, He wasn't going to be easy to catch. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Amy's words. 4 survivors scattered in the woods, 3 of them still missing, possibly injured, definitely terrified. And somewhere out there, the Colonel was planning his next move. She got up and drove to the old mining road that headed north into the mountains. The fog was thick, making her headlights barely penetrate the darkness. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she had to do something. About 15 miles up the winding road, she saw something that made her pull over. Smoke. Thin and grey, rising from somewhere deeper in the forest. She grabbed her flashlight and radio and started walking toward it. The smell hit her first, burnt wood, melted plastic, and something else, something that made her stomach turn. She followed the smell through the trees until she reached a clearing. The compound was a graveyard of charred buildings and twisted metal. The main structure had collapsed completely, leaving only concrete foundations and scattered debris. But in the center of the destruction, something caught her eye, a flagpole still standing with something white tied to the top. Sarah approached carefully, her flashlight beam wavering. As she got closer, she realized what it was. A soccer jersey, burgundy and gold with the number 12 on the back. Amy's jersey from 30 years ago. And pinned to it was a note, written in fresh ink. "I know you're looking for them. Come alone to the old mine shaft on Eagle Ridge tomorrow at midnight. Bring the girl who escaped, or the others die." Sarah's hands shook as she read the words. The Colonel had been watching. He knew about Amy, knew about the investigation, and he still had the other survivors. She looked around the burnt compound, imagining the terror that had happened here. 30 years of stolen lives, of children turned into prisoners, of families that never knew what happened to their daughters. But now she had a choice to make. Follow the rules of a madman, or risk the lives of 3 innocent women who had already suffered enough. She folded the note carefully and walked back to her car. Tomorrow night she would face the Colonel, but she wouldn't be going alone, and she wouldn't be following his rules. The hunt was about to begin. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat in her kitchen, staring at the note while Agent Martinez coordinated with tactical teams over the phone. The plan was simple in theory: surround the mine shaft with FBI agents, wait for Webb to show himself, then move in. But Sarah knew it wouldn't be that easy. "He's been doing this for 30 years, she told Agent Martinez. "He'll see us coming from miles away." Agent Martinez looked up from her tactical maps. "That's why we're going to give him what he wants. You and Amy will go to the meeting point as requested, but you won't be alone." Sarah shook her head. "Amy's been through enough. I won't use her as bait." "She's not bait," Agent Martinez replied. "She's the key. Webb wants her back because she represents his failure. His perfect system broke down and she's the proof." At 6 p.m., Sarah visited Amy one last time. The news about the note had shaken her badly. She sat curled in the hospital bed, staring at nothing. "I can't go back there," Amy whispered. "I can't face him again." Sarah sat beside her. "You don't have to face him alone. We'll have backup everywhere. This is our chance to end it, to save the others." Amy looked at her with hollow eyes. "You don't understand. The Colonel doesn't just control people's bodies. He gets inside their heads. Even now, part of me still believes the things he said, that I'm worthless, that I belong to him." Sarah took her hand. "That's not true. You escaped. You survived. You're Amy Kessler, team captain, the girl who never gave up." Amy's grip tightened. The others, Katie and Sarah and little Nora, they're probably terrified. They've been hiding in the woods for weeks, not knowing if it's safe to come out. "Then help us find them," Sarah said. "Help us bring them home." Amy nodded slowly. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Okay, but if something goes wrong, if he gets us again, promise me you'll tell people what really happened. Tell them we fought." The mine shaft at Eagle Ridge was a wound in the mountainside, a black mouth that seemed to swallow light. Sarah parked at the base of the trail, her radio crackling with updates from the agents positioned around the perimeter. Eagle 1 in position, Eagle 2 ready. No movement detected. Sarah looked at Amy, who sat rigid in the passenger seat. "You ready for this?" Amy nodded, but her hands were shaking. "I keep thinking about the others. What if we're too late? What if he's already hurt them?" "We're not too late," Sarah said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. They started up the trail, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The October air was cold and still, carrying the smell of pine and rotting leaves. With each step, Sarah felt the weight of 30 years of secrets pressing down on her. Halfway up the trail, Amy stopped. She tilted her head, listening. "Do you hear that?" Sarah strained her ears. There, faint but unmistakable, was the sound of voices, not adult voices, but something younger, more frightened. "They're close," Amy whispered. "The other girls. He's using them to make sure we cooperate." Sarah spoke quietly into her radio. "Control, we have possible hostages on site. Moving to investigate." They continued up the trail, the voices growing clearer. Sarah could make out words now, fragments of conversation that made her blood run cold. "Please, we did what you said. We came back. Don't hurt us." The voice was young, desperate. Sarah recognized it from old team videos. Katie Morrison, the goalkeeper who'd never let anything past her. They reached the mine entrance. The shaft extended into the mountain, supported by rotting timber and rusted metal. A battery-powered lantern sat just inside, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And there, silhouetted against the light, was Marcus Webb. He was smaller than Sarah had expected, maybe 5'10", but his presence filled the space like a physical force. His hair was grey now, his face weathered, but his eyes were the same cold blue from the photograph. "Detective Chen," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Thank you for coming. And Victory, welcome home." Amy stepped back, her breathing shallow. "My name is Amy," Webb smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Names are just words, Victory. Identity is what I give you. You learned that lesson once. You'll learn it again." From deeper in the mine came a sound that made Sarah's heart break. Quiet sobbing, the sound of people who had cried until they had no tears left. "Let them go," Sarah said, her hand moving toward her weapon. "This is between you and me." Webb shook his head. "Nothing is between you and me, Detective. This is about order, about family, about keeping people safe from a world that doesn't care about them." He gestured toward the mine shaft. 30 years ago, I saved these girls from lives of mediocrity and disappointment. I gave them purpose, structure, meaning. And how did they repay me? By burning down everything I built. Sarah took a step forward. "You didn't save them. You stole them. You stole their childhoods, their families, their futures." Webb's expression hardened. Their families gave up looking after 6 months. Their futures were working dead-end jobs in a dying town. I offered them something better. "You offered them slavery," Sarah replied. Webb reached into his jacket and pulled out a pistol. Old military issue, but well-maintained. "I offered them salvation, and I'm prepared to offer it again." Behind him, Sarah could see movement in the shadows. 3 figures huddled together, tied and gagged. Even in the dim light, she could recognize them from old yearbook photos. Katie Morrison, Sarah Jensen, and between them, a small woman with dark hair who had to be Nora. They were alive. Terrified and traumatized, but alive. Amy stepped forward, her voice stronger now. "Let them go, Colonel. You want me back? Fine. But they've suffered enough." Webb's smile returned. "Still trying to be the team captain. Victory. Still trying to save everyone else." "That's what leaders do," Amy said. "They protect their team." Sarah saw her chance. While Webb was focused on Amy, she keyed her radio. "All units move in. Hostages confirmed. Armed subject at mine entrance." Webb heard the transmission, his face twisted with rage. "You brought backup. I specifically said to come alone." Sarah drew her weapon. "It's over, Webb. You're surrounded." Webb raised his pistol toward Amy. "Then we'll end this the way it should have ended 30 years ago, with Victory coming home." But Amy didn't cower. Instead, she stepped forward, her voice carrying across the mine shaft with the authority of someone who had found her strength again. "My name is Amy Kessler. I was team captain of the Millbrook High soccer team. These are my teammates, and we're going home." The sound of footsteps echoed through the mine as FBI agents moved into position. Webb spun around, his weapon wavering between Sarah and Amy. "You can't have them," he snarled. "They belong to me." Sarah kept her weapon trained on him. "Nobody belongs to you, not anymore." Webb's finger tightened on the trigger. For a moment, time stood still. Then Amy did something that surprised everyone. She started to sing. It was the old team song, the one they'd sung on bus rides to away games. Her voice was shaky at first, but it grew stronger with each word. And from the shadows behind Webb, other voices joined in. Katie first, then Sarah Jensen, then even little Nora. Their voices echoed off the mine walls, a defiant chorus that spoke of friendship and hope and the refusal to be broken. Webb's hand began to shake. The song seemed to physically pain him, as if the sound of their unity was more than he could bear. "Stop it," he whispered. "Stop singing." But they didn't stop. They sang louder, their voices blending together like they had 30 years ago when they were just teenagers with dreams of championship rings and bright futures. And in that moment, Sarah understood something profound. The Colonel's power had always been about isolation, about making people forget who they were. But these women remembered. They remembered their names, their team, their bond. Webb's weapon clattered to the ground. He covered his ears, his face twisted in anguish. "Make it stop," he pleaded. "Make them stop." FBI agents swarmed the mine entrance. Webb was on the ground, handcuffed, before Sarah even realized the confrontation was over. As the agents cut the restraints from the 3 hostages, Sarah holstered her weapon and walked over to Amy. "You did it," she said. "You brought them home." Amy smiled through her tears. "We did it. All of us. Together." The 4 women embraced in the mouth of the mine, their voices still echoing off the walls. After 30 years of silence, the Millbrook High soccer team was finally complete. 6 months later, Sarah stood at the edge of the newly renovated Millbrook High soccer field. The spring air was warm and filled with the sound of teenage voices, the thud of soccer balls, and the sharp blast of coaches' whistles. The field had been renamed the Amy Kessler Memorial Field, though Amy herself had protested the honor. "I'm not dead," she'd said with a laugh that was becoming more frequent. Maybe save the memorials for later? But the town had insisted. The field, the team, the entire community needed something to mark what had happened, to ensure that the 12 girls who boarded a bus in 1995 would never be forgotten again. Amy walked up beside Sarah, moving more confidently now. The months of therapy had helped, though she still jumped at unexpected sounds and sometimes woke up thinking she was back in the compound. She carried a folder full of papers. "The scholarship applications," she said, holding up the folder. 25 girls from 3 different schools. All of them want to play soccer. All of them need financial help. Sarah smiled. The Amy Kessler Foundation had raised over $2 million in 6 months. Donations had poured in from across the country, from families who understood what it meant to have a child go missing, from communities that refused to let such stories end in darkness. Katie Morrison jogged over from the practice field where she'd been coaching the junior varsity team. Her hair was shorter now, silver streaking through the blonde, but her eyes held the same fierce determination they'd had 30 years ago. "The girls are asking about the tournament again," Katie said. "They want to know if you're really going to play." Sarah looked at Amy, who grinned. The first annual memorial tournament was scheduled for next month. 4 teams from different schools playing in honor of the missing girls. Amy, Katie, and Sarah Jensen had agreed to play in an exhibition match against a team of local teachers and parents. "We're 46 years old," Sarah said. "We're going to embarrass ourselves." Amy laughed. "We're survivors. We can handle a little embarrassment." Sarah Jensen approached from the parking lot. She'd been the quietest of the four since their rescue, preferring to work behind the scenes, organizing the foundation and coordinating with other survivor groups. But soccer seemed to bring out something in her that therapy couldn't quite reach. "Nora's here," she said, gesturing toward a small woman getting out of a car near the school entrance. Nora had been the hardest to help. After being taken at age 12 and held for nearly 4 decades, she struggled with basic aspects of modern life. But she'd found purpose in working with other survivors, traveling to speak at conferences and training sessions for law enforcement. The FBI had used their testimonies to break up 3 more compounds across 2 states. Marcus Webb was serving multiple life sentences, but his network had been larger than anyone imagined. The investigation was ongoing, with new survivors coming forward every month. Nora walked over to join them, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd learned not to trust open spaces. She carried a small bouquet of flowers. "For the memorial," she said quietly, "I wanted to leave something for the ones who didn't make it." They walked together to the center of the field, where a simple stone marker had been placed. It listed the names of all 12 team members with a small inscription beneath, "Taken October 14th, 1995, remembered forever," but not all of them had died in captivity. The official investigation had revealed that Jessica Martinez and Megan Phillips had died in the first year, as Amy had said. 2 others had died of illness over the years, but the remaining girls had been moved to different compounds, scattered across the country as Webb's operation grew. 3 more had been found alive in a facility in Montana. They were receiving treatment at a specialized center, learning to rebuild their lives after decades of psychological imprisonment. The search continued for the others. Amy knelt and placed her flowers at the base of the memorial stone. She whispered something too quiet for the others to hear, then stood and wiped her eyes. "They would have loved this," she said, looking around at the field, full of young players, all of it, the noise, the energy, the hope. A teenage girl ran over from the practice field, her face flushed with excitement. "Ms. Kessler," she called out, "Coach Morrison says you're going to teach us that play you used to run, the one where you scored the winning goal against Central High." Amy smiled. "The crossing play." "Sure, but you'll need to be faster than we were. We were pretty slow back then." The girl grinned and ran back to the field. Amy watched her go, then turned to Sarah. "You know what's strange," she said. "I used to think about that winning goal all the time when I was in the compound. I'd replay it in my head, remember the feeling of the ball hitting the back of the net, the sound of the crowd cheering. It was like holding on to a piece of myself that he couldn't take." Sarah nodded. "That's what saved you. All of you, you held on to who you were." Amy looked around at her teammates, her friends, her family. "Not just who we were," she said, "who we still are." As the sun began to set over the field, the 4 women walked toward the parking lot. Tomorrow, Amy would return to her job at the local community center, working with at-risk youth. Katie would continue coaching and teaching, Sarah Jensen would keep organizing the foundation, Nora would travel to another conference, sharing her story with law enforcement officers who needed to understand what they were really fighting against. And Sarah Chen would return to her job as a detective, but with a new purpose. She'd been assigned to a task force dedicated to finding missing persons, specializing in cases that had gone cold. The skills she'd learned, the networks she'd built, the understanding she'd gained about how people could simply disappear, would be put to use finding others. But tonight, they were just 4 women who'd found their way back to each other, standing on a soccer field where teenage girls practiced their dreams under the lights. Amy looked back at the field one more time. "You know what I realized," she said. "We did win that championship. Maybe not the way we planned, but we won. We came home." Sarah smiled. "The whole team." Amy nodded. "The whole team." As they reached their cars, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Agent Martinez, who'd become a friend over the months of investigation and testimony. "New lead on compound in Oregon. 3 survivors found. Could use your help with interviews." Sarah showed the message to the others. Amy read it and looked up with determination in her eyes. "When do we leave?" she asked. Sarah looked at her 3 teammates, these women who'd survived the unthinkable and chosen to use their pain to help others. "Whenever you're ready," she said. Amy smiled, and for the first time in 30 years it reached her eyes completely. "We're ready," she said. "We've been ready our whole lives." The lights on the soccer field continued to shine as they drove away, illuminating young players who ran and laughed and dreamed of victory, never knowing how close they'd come to a different kind of darkness. But they were protected now, watched over by 4 women who understood that sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to disappear. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the valley, but it sounded less like a warning now and more like a promise. The promise that no matter how far someone travels into the darkness, there's always a way back home. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, your team is waiting for you when you get there.